Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about something that I think is absolutely crucial for keeping our digital lives secure.
Okay.
You've been doing a bunch of exploring in the realm of cybersecurity,
I have, yes, quite a bit.
and there's this core formula that seems to pop up all the time, S equals P plus D plus R.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Which, for our listeners who may not know, it stands for security equals prevention plus detection plus response.
Exactly. And if you remember, we were talking before about confidentiality and integrity and availability.
Right.
And that was really about the what of security. What are we actually aiming for? This formula, the S equals P plus D plus R, it really gets into the how. Like, how do organizations actually work to ensure those things?
Exactly. And as we've been, looking at all these different areas of security, like managing, who can access what,
Right.
and securing our computers and our phones and all of our devices, and then, protecting our networks and applications, keeping our data safe, a lot of that really falls under that prevention category, right? It's all about putting safeguards in place.
Absolutely. Trying to stop the bad things from happening in the first place.
Exactly. Hoping to prevent those bad things from happening.
Yeah.
But, as I think we all know, prevention,
It's not always perfect.
it's not foolproof. It's not always enough.
Yeah.
And that's really where the detection comes in. I mean, even with the best, preventative measures in place, a really determined attacker could still find a way in.
They good. And they do.
So that ability to spot when something has gone wrong, that's crucial. And that's what we're going to be focusing a lot on today.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about that Target breach from a few years back. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
multiple alerts, right, that seemed totally unrelated at the time. They probably could have pointed to that initial intrusion. If they had a really robust detection system in place,
Yeah.
it could have potentially, limited how much data those attackers got away with.
Yeah. Right. Right. And then, of course, once we detect a problem,
You got to do something about it.
we have to do something about it, right? That's where that response part of the equation comes in.
Exactly.
And we're going to, touch on that briefly today, especially when we talk about the team that's often responsible for both detection and response,
Yeah.
which is, what's called the Security Operations Center, or they call it the SOC for short.
The SOC, yep.
And, when something does happen, because it inevitably will,
Yeah.
that response phase, it's all about, how quickly and effectively an organization can contain that damage, fix what went wrong, and get back to normal.
Absolutely. Get back to business as usual.
Exactly.
So, yeah, let's jump into that detection piece.
Okay.
So really, at its heart, detection is about gathering information, from all those different security areas you mentioned, identity and endpoints and network and applications and data, and then channeling all of that information into a system that can actually make sense of it all. I mean, just to take a step back for a second,
Sure.
we talk about logs.
All right.
We're talking about records of events. So like when you log into your email,
Right.
that action gets recorded in a log file somewhere.
It's like a history.
It is. It's a history.
A little timestamp.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like having sensors all over your house,
Yeah.
feeding information back to this central monitoring station.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So it's constantly like feeding all this information
Yes.
to some central place. And then from all that flow of information, there are kind of four key activities that emerge.
Yep.
You've got to keep an eye on what's happening.
Got to monitor.
Right, monitoring. Then you have to analyze all that information.
See if there's anything suspicious.
Right, anything suspicious, any anomalies. Then you got to report on what you found.
Absolutely. You got to keep track of things.
And then, of course, there's this proactive element, which is the threat hunting.
That's the fun part.
Yeah, where you're actually going out and looking for threats.
Absolutely. Trying to get ahead of the game.
Exactly. And the real power behind all of these detection activities, they come from two primary technologies. There's security information and event management systems. We call them SIEMs for short.
Tim. Yeah.
And then there are these extended detection and response systems, or XDRs.
Those DRs. Mm-hmm.
And those are the tools that really allow security teams to make sense of all this data.
They are. I mean, the amount of data that our digital environments generate is just astronomical. These tools help us sift through it all.
So let's break those down a little bit. Let's start with SIEM. So you were talking about, having separate security consoles for each area.
Yeah, like one for access, one for devices, and so on.
Right.
It can get really messy.
Yeah, it can be really inefficient.
Oh, absolutely. And costly.
Right. And it makes it hard to get that complete picture.
Yeah, imagine it's like having different security guards for every room in a building. each with their own little logbook, but no one's overseeing everything.
Right, right.
Just doesn't work well.
And that's really where SIEM comes in. It's like that, central nervous system.
Exactly. It brings it all together.
Right. It pulls in logs, alarms, events, even network traffic data from all these separate systems.
Yep. Everything from login attempts to firewall logs,
Right.
even application logs, all of it goes into this central database.
So instead of, seeing 4 different alerts from 4 different systems that could all be related to the same attack,
Right.
the SIEM can look at it all together
Connect the dots.
and present it as, one manageable event.
Exactly.
And that's the whole idea of correlation, right?
It is. It is. Correlation is key. It helps those analysts see the bigger picture rather than getting bogged down in a bunch of seemingly isolated incidents.
So it's like a puzzle, and the SIEM is helping you put the pieces together.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah,
That's exactly what it is.
And then, on top of that, SIEMs can do a lot of analysis based on predefined rules.
Right. Think of these as like preset instructions based on the organization's security policies. So, a rule might say, if we see traffic coming from a specific country and multiple failed login attempts on a user account, that's a high priority alert.
So it's like an if-then statement. Right. If
Uh-huh.
this happens, then do that.
Exactly.
And can these rules be customized? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Organizations can tailor them to their specific needs and concerns. What kind of threats are they most worried about? What are their specific vulnerabilities?
So it's not just like an off-the-shelf product. You can
You
actually...
got to tweak it, make it work for you.
Exactly. And then, if those conditions in a rule are met, the SIEM can automatically trigger actions.
Yep, like sending an alarm with a specific priority.
Right.
High, medium, low,
Right.
and assigning it to the right person on the security team.
Like, hey, this looks suspicious. Go take a look at this.
Exactly. It streamlines the process, helps ensure nothing gets missed.
And then, beyond those rule-based detections, SIEMs can also do this really interesting thing called anomaly detection.
Ah, yes.
Mm.
This is where things get really interesting. We're talking about spotting things that just seem, out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And increasingly, this involves using artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, something called user behavior analytics, or UBA.
UBA. That sounds interesting.
It is. Think of it like this. UBA systems, they learn what normal behavior looks like for each user
Right.
and for the overall system. And then they flag anything that deviates from that norm.
Yeah.
So, if a user suddenly starts accessing files they've never touched before,
Oh,
or if there's unusual network activity happening at 3 a.m. when everyone's supposed to be asleep,
yeah.
those could be anomalies that need further investigation.
That's like what doesn't belong.
Yeah, exactly. It's about
Yeah.
spotting the thing that doesn't belong, even if you didn't explicitly define what you were looking for. So, for example, a normal baseline for a user might be logging in from the office between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and accessing specific project folders.
Right.
But then you see them logging in from a different country at 2 a.m.
Red flag.
and trying to download the entire customer database.
That's not good.
That's definitely an anomaly.
Yeah. So it's not just about, looking for known bad things, but also,
Looking for things that are just off.
yeah.
Things that make you go, that's not quite right.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine with all this data collection and analysis, SIEMs can also generate these really useful reports over time.
Oh, absolutely. They can show trends in an organization's security posture. Things like the number of alarms detected and resolved each month.
Right.
This gives valuable insights to the SOC and to management, helps them understand if their security measures are actually working or if there are areas they need to focus on.
Yeah. So it's like a continuous improvement process.
It is. You're always looking for ways to do better, to stay ahead of the bad guys.
Okay, so that was a good overview of SIEM, kind of the central hub for all that security information.
The brain of the operation.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about XDR, extended detection and response.
Okay, yeah, XDR. So you mentioned that it grew out of something called EDR, endpoint detection and response. And while SIEM takes this broad bottom-up approach, aggregating logs from everywhere, XDR, and its precursor EDR, they tend to be more top-down. So the core idea of EDR is to install these little software programs called agents directly on endpoints,
Right.
like your servers, your desktops, laptops.
Right.
And these agents, they actually perform local detection and can even automate some of those initial response actions right there on the device.
So instead of sending everything to a central system and waiting for a response,
Right.
EDR is like, hey, I can handle this right here.
Exactly. It's all about pushing those security actions closer to the source of a potential incident.
Okay. So it's like having a security guard in every room
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
instead of just at the front door. And then XDR expands on that concept, right? It goes beyond just endpoints.
It does. It integrates with other security layers, like network and cloud environments.
Okay.
So it gives you this more coordinated, holistic view of threats across all these different areas.
So it's like EDR on steroids.
Exactly.
Right. It's taking that concept and expanding it.
To the next level.
Yeah. And you mentioned that XDR systems can work with SIEMs and vice versa.
Oh, absolutely. They're not competing technologies at all.
So they can actually work together.
They can.
Yeah.
You might have an XDR system collecting all this detailed information from endpoints and feeding some of that data into a SIEM for broader correlation and analysis.
Right.
Or, a high-level alarm generated by a SIEM could trigger a more detailed investigation using XDR capabilities on a specific laptop.
So it's like having both a wide-angle lens and a zoom lens.
I like that analogy.
For security visibility, right?
It is. You need both to get the complete picture.
Okay. And then you mentioned this thing called federated search within XDR.
Yeah, this is where things get really cool.
Tell me about it.
So instead of having to pull all the data from every system into one central place first, federated search lets you ask a question like, hey, has anyone seen this specific piece of malicious code?
Right.
And then it queries all your connected systems in real time.
Oh, wow.
Each system checks its own local data and only reports back if it finds a match.
So it's a lot more efficient because you're not constantly moving huge amounts of data around.
Exactly. You're leaving the data where it is and only retrieving what you need when you need it.
That makes sense. It's like, what's that card game? Go Fish.
Go fish, yeah.
You ask if anyone has a certain card.
And only the people who have it respond.
Exactly.
That's a perfect analogy.
So it sounds like, the most effective approach isn't choosing between SIEM and XDR.
Oh.
It's really about using them together.
It is. You want both.
Right. So you've got XDR for that localized detection and efficient data retrieval. And then you've got SIEM for that broader correlation and alerting based on all that aggregated information.
Exactly. You put them together and you create a much more robust and comprehensive security posture.
Okay. So we've covered the technologies that help with monitoring and analyzing.
Mhm.
Now let's talk about that threat hunting.
Oh, okay, yeah. Threat hunting. So you described it as a more proactive approach to security.
I did.
And to understand why it's so important, you really have to look at the typical attack timeline.
Okay.
So attackers, they often spend a lot of time just observing, exploring the target environment. That's the reconnaissance phase.
Like casing the joint.
Exactly, before they actually launch a full-blown attack.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's often a huge delay between when an attack happens and when an organization realizes they've been breached.
Yeah. You mentioned mean time to identify, or MTTI.
MTTI, yeah.
Okay.
And studies have shown that that can be hundreds of days. Yeah. Imagine someone being in your network for that long before anyone even notices.
That's terrible.
It is. It is. And then even after an attack is detected, it takes even more time to actually contain it and fix the problem.
Right.
That's the mean time to contain, or MTTC, which can also be really long.
So we're talking potentially months,
Oh, yeah, easily.
if not close to a year from the initial attack to actually fully recovering.
Yeah. That's a huge window of opportunity for attackers to do damage.
That's a lot of damage.
It is. And that's what threat hunting aims to shrink. That window.
Okay.
By proactively searching for threats that might be lurking in the environment before they even trigger any alarms.
Yeah.
It's about being proactive.
So it's not just sitting back and waiting for an alarm to go off.
No, you're going out there looking for trouble.
Right.
You're being the hunter, not the hunted.
Okay. So unlike just reacting to an alarm, threat hunting is about actively searching for suspicious activity.
Exactly.
And this really relies on the skills and the intuition of cybersecurity analysts, right?
It does. These threat hunters, they use their experience, their understanding of attacker tactics to form hypotheses about potential malicious activity. They're thinking like the attackers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they're saying, based on what we've seen in other industries, what might an attacker try to do in our environment?
That's smart.
It is. And then they use all the tools we've been talking about, SIEMs, XDRs, to actually search for evidence to support those hypotheses.
So they're not just looking for known bad things, they're looking for anything that seems off?
Right. Those subtle indicators of compromise that might not have triggered an automatic alert.
So they're really like detectives.
They are. Digital detectives.
Yeah. And if they're successful, that can lead to a much earlier detection, right?
It can, catching those attackers much closer to their entry point.
Before they can do a lot of damage.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the impact.
Okay, so to kind of bring it all together, it seems like a good security strategy. It really needs all three parts of that formula.
It
Prevention to stop attacks in the first place.
Yeah.
Detection, powered by SIEMs and XDRs, and that proactive threat hunting
hmm
to find the attacks that do get through, and then response to deal with those incidents effectively.
Absolutely. It's a layered approach. You need all three.
Right. So the formula S equals P plus D plus R. It's not just some theoretical thing.
No, it's a practical framework for building a strong security posture.
And it seems like understanding the how behind that what of cybersecurity.
The how is just as important as the what.
Right. Through those technologies and those processes, that's really what allows organizations to protect themselves.
It is. It's what gives them the power to fight back.
And this really highlights, cybersecurity, it's a constantly evolving field.
It is. It never stands still.
Right. So you need both that comprehensive data aggregation to get that broad visibility
hmm
and that targeted proactive investigation to stay ahead of those sophisticated threats.
Absolutely. You've
Okay.
got to be thinking like the attackers, always one step ahead.
Exactly. Well, this has been a fascinating look at detection and threat hunting.
It has. It's a complex but crucial aspect of cybersecurity.
It is, and it raises an interesting question for all of our listeners.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
What kind of threats do you think might be the most challenging for current detection systems to identify? And what kind of new approaches might be needed to uncover them in the future?
That's a great question. It's something we all need to be thinking about as the threat landscape continues to evolve.
It is. It's a constantly shifting landscape. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time
See you then.
for another deep dive into the world of cybersecurity.
Always a pleasure.